First question, just go ahead and spell your first last name and give us your title.
Sure. I'm Deborah Cools, and my first name is Deborah. And my last name is spelled Kuhls. And I'm Chief of Trauma at UMC.
All right. So Dr. Cools, just quickly talk to us about the 1 October evening, what the trauma area was like before the shooting happened, and kind of just give us a little timeline to take us back a little bit.
So I had been a trauma surgeon during the day, and we typically split our day into two parts where we have two different teams. So I was part of the day team. We were busy, so I was still in-house after 10 at night along with my residents. We were preparing to go home, and the night team, including a trauma surgeon and residents, and an emergency physician as well, were all in the hospital in the trauma area. And I remember that we got a radio call saying there was a shooting on the strip, and our anesthesiologist on call happened to be also in our trauma resuscitation area. And so I decided that I would just wait a few minutes to hear more details until I was contemplating going home. And we heard that there would be 5 to 10 victims, and literally within a minute or two, it would be maybe 10 to 20. And at that point, we decided to activate the disaster plan. And I was there along with the night trauma surgeon and other physicians and nurses. And literally, it was like every 1 to 2 minutes we would get an update. So it went from 5 to 10 to 10 to 20, and then it was 50 to 100 or more. And literally, this happened over the course of just a very few minutes. And as soon as we activated the disaster plan, actually everyone knew what to do. The charge nurse from our trauma resuscitation area knew to move patients that were waiting disposition to our, what we call our PACU area, which is post-anesthesia area, so that we had all beds available in our trauma resus area. And we have a separate emergency room just for trauma, unlike most trauma centers. The emergency physician knew that her role in the disaster plan was to take security and some other healthcare professionals right outside of the trauma area to basically sort, we call it triage, to make sure that the most seriously injured would come into our trauma resuscitation area first. So I would say after our first notification, it was less than 10 minutes when the first group of patients arrived. And we went from 0 to 20 patients within 5 minutes. And they were the most seriously injured. And the emergency physician, again, who was right outside of the trauma center, took the other 20 patients that had arrived at the same time, quickly did a sort on who needed our attention the first, at the most critical, sent the most critical to us. And then the other 20 were staged in another area with healthcare professionals, but they were thought to be less injured. When we activated our disaster plan, pretty much all the residents who were in the hospital from multiple specialties came to our trauma resuscitation area. The nurses and pharmacists who were working in other areas of the hospital, they went down to a skeleton crew. They came down to the trauma area, and the charge nurse was able to give them instructions on placing an IV and some IV fluid with each patient. And we assessed the most injured. Unfortunately, we did have some people who arrived not alive. and we were able to determine that very quickly. And we decided who needed blood and who needed the OR. I failed to mention that we also opened up, we have 3 operating rooms specifically for trauma. When we activated the disaster plan, we immediately opened up all of those rooms. And then we have a main operating room area as well that at that time had 18 ORs. The OR staff in the main also opened up as many rooms as they had staff for. We called in additional staff. Our backup surgeon that night was actually the chief of our Office of Military Medicine. And so he came in, he was active duty military. So both civilian and military personnel were called into UMC. And I was very happy to report that anyone who arrived alive stayed alive. But at one point we had, I believe, 8 operating rooms running at the same time. We had enough physicians, nurses, and pharmacists and respiratory therapists to actually open up other areas of the hospital, which were like our same-day surgery area, our pre-anesthesia and our post-anesthesia area that are adjacent to our ORs. We opened them up as like additional emergency rooms for those people who didn't immediately need to go to the operating room. So I stayed in charge. I stayed all night. I was the senior surgeon, and I acted in that role throughout the night. So I kept track of all of the other ancillary ERs, if you will, that we opened up, stayed in touch with those physicians who needed to go to the OR, who was finished with OR. We had another surgeon actually at that time, our chief of trauma, who obviously came in. He actually rotated through all of the operating rooms to be sure that the operations were happening very quickly and that we were using damage control surgery, which is a type of surgery where we quickly identify what is the threat to life, which is usually bleeding in these patients, and that other parts of the surgery that could be temporized would actually be delayed until the next day. And so we had, I think, a very organized, large team that we were able to, if you will, take care of all patients. Patients who need surgery got surgery that night. We had enough blood, we had enough supplies. Administration of the hospital came in because that's part of our disaster plan. Our incident command center in the hospital was set up. And I would say I had administrators who were in the trauma resus area who would ask me, what do I need? And I never ran out of anything that I needed. I just told them what we were using a lot of. And you know, I think none of the patients wanted for any procedures, any blood, any medications. And it was definitely the most unusual situation I've been in. I had trained a lot in disaster preparedness because I was at that time, if you remember back in 9/11, I was 1 year out of fellowship. And at that time, I was the only trauma surgeon in-house. And if I remember correctly, after 9/11, I think we were initially on the top 5 list in case there were other terrorist activities that were planned. And, you know, I started to plan in case something like this happened in Las Vegas at that time. I also spent several years getting additional training so that I would be prepared if something like this ever happened in Las Vegas. Of course, I hope that it never would have happened, but I feel that all of that extra training that I got must have created, we call it muscle memory, if you will, that that I kind of immediately flipped into a different mode where on an individual basis and every day we do the most for the patient that we're caring for right at that moment. In a mass casualty, you do the most for the most number of patients. So it is a different way of practicing medicine to save the most lives.
Dr. Cools, 7 years. Does this day ever get any easier for you?
I would say therapeutically, I mean, the life of a trauma surgeon, we see people with all sorts of injuries. Most that woke up that morning that didn't think they would be in a hospital in a life-threatening situation. So we're used to that. But I think to see this large number of people that they were out for, if you will, some relief for their everyday stress, to relax. They clearly were not doing anything that would be, put themselves intentionally into harm's way. And for someone to maliciously try to kill what appeared to me the largest number of people possible was something that I never thought would occur in my own community. It was a really difficult time, but I would say that we're really trained in an emergency situation to stay cool, try to stay calm, and to think very rationally, with the patient being the focus, not so much what we were experiencing. And I would say that almost never a month goes by that I don't talk about this. And professionally talk about this. Just last week, I gave a talk on how to manage through crisis. And the reason I was asked as a speaker was because of my role in 1 October here. So for me to talk about it, I think is actually, if you will, therapeutic from an emotional perspective. I feel an obligation to train. As you know, UMC is a teaching hospital, and I feel it really necessary to train people, medical students, residents, and fellows. And I'll be giving a grand rounds on this topic later this year to impart what we all learned from this and how to prepare for this type of disaster. I will also say that the FBI, and I've not had a chance to actually share this with my UMC colleagues, but I really need to do this. The FBI has produced a documentary based upon both our shooting and the Pulse nightclub shooting in Orlando, and its impact upon responders, whether they're first responders outside of the hospital, that includes EMS and law enforcement, as well as healthcare professionals. They have prepared a documentary, and it will be, it'll be launched sometime later this year in Las Vegas. And it will be online for others to learn from. It was shown about 10 days ago at a trauma surgery professional meeting that occurred in Las Vegas. And it talks about how being a witness to a large number of victims from a shooting like ours, or like the Pulse nightclub or others, how it really affects really everyone who's involved in their care.
That's pretty amazing. I would like to take a look at that myself. You kind of leaned into my next thought here, and that is, how does this 1 October event prepare your trauma center, for years to come? Can you just quickly kind of give us a quick summary of how that is going to help the trauma center moving forward.
Sure. I would say both UMC and the whole Southern Nevada healthcare team really took a very serious look at how we could be even better prepared. You know, we're always looking for areas of improvement. And I guess I think it's fair to say that federal agencies actually commended both UMC and the whole Southern Nevada healthcare team, if you will, in our response to 1 October. But we took a look at several things, and one was obviously in a shooting like this, one needs access to blood. Okay, so and quickly we need access to blood. So we looked at what we call our massive transfusion protocol. We even changed the containers that we use, and we found coolers because blood needs to be cooled to be preserved. We found some that were actually monitor temperature, location, and they really expedite additional blood. We have our own blood bank in our trauma center, but sometimes we need additional blood, and we took a look at that. We took a look at, is there any way that we could even more realistically prepare for disasters? And we've done many more drills. The American College of Surgeons actually changed some of their standards to require even more specialists to be on the disaster committee that each hospital has to maintain. So we took, I would say we took a look from A to Z. And I think during our disaster, our military-civilian partnership was very, very instrumental in us being able to surge our capacity in terms of all healthcare professionals, including nurses and anesthesiologists and other specialists. So I think it reinforced that relationship. And the whole Southern Nevada area, if you will, it's largely Clark County, we started to prepare in different ways for all large events. And some of the peripheral population areas, we've gotten them more involved. And they all participate not only in meetings, but in very realistic exercises.
So, Dr. Cools, I'll wrap up with this thought. As you came into work today, what was the overall vibe and emotional state of some of your staff? I know probably some of the staff have different stories from that night that impacted them. Just kind of give us a little bit of an insight as to how staff are emotionally handling this day.
So, you know, among our residents and fellows, you know, most of them have graduated and have moved on. Some have actually stayed with us as attendings. And I think it's sort of mixed. I think we're very proud of the work that we do and the commitment of our hospital to care for injured patients no matter what the circumstances is. So that part is very positive, and we believe we did a very good job in taking care of patients. And I think we feel good about that. It's always a little sad to recollect how shootings are much more common now. They don't even necessarily make the national news unless they're huge. So that continued violence is of course, you know, sad. It's a sad part of our society and something that I know we're all very interested in changing. So I would say it's somewhat mixed. I think we're also grateful though that our community, we're going to be erecting a permanent memorial, which I think is very appropriate. for our community as a remembrance. And I participated in presenting to some of the design teams, and I've seen the design. I think it will not only be a memorial to the people who lost their lives, but it will also be reflective in terms of how we can work together to try to keep our communities as safe as ever. And I'd like to make one other comment. The medical community overall banded together in ways that I have not seen before. And people from every specialty got involved and were supportive, and also realized that they all have an obligation to take care of patients no matter what their specialty is. And in a true emergency, we practice sort of even outside of our specialty area. So for instance, if we needed more people to assist in surgery, we could have some of the very specialized surgeons who typically operate on kind of one part of the body or one specialized area. They can assist in other types of surgeries. And this actually happened, I think, across the valley. And I think it's a reminder that we all have an obligation. We took a Hippocratic oath, and this is one of the instances where it really is invoked other than in everyday occurrences. I think you're muted.
Sorry, there we go. Doctor, we really appreciate your time, and we thank you and the rest of the staff at the hospital for all the hard work, and we send good healing to you guys as you guys continue to heal from that night.
Could I make a couple of other comments?
Sure.
So I think our community has actually responded to 2 disasters in recent times. Our shooting was one, and today, of course, the 7th anniversary of the shooting. That was followed shortly thereafter by the COVID pandemic. And that is a very different type of disaster. So our community, if you will, has suffered from 2 mass casualty events. One was a shooting, and one was an infection that took the lives of many. The healthcare professionals that took care of patients in both of those situations, in many cases, they were the same people. And so I think we need to remember that we, as a healthcare community, have shown resilience, and that we are still very strong and devoted to care for patients no matter what situation brings them to us.
Very well said. I did not even think of it like that, but I love that. That's good. Dr. Coles, appreciate it. Thank you so much.